Welcome back, guys. Right now we have a WG 101 on Majesty 2. Check it out.
Majesty 2 is one of the many games set in the magical land of Ardania, a fantasy kingdom fraught with evil and intrigue that was first created by Cyberlaw Studios and then later changed hands to Paradox Interactive. As the name implies, you play as his or her Majesty, omnipresent ruler of the realm. The easiest way to describe the gameplay in Majesty is it's a fantasy real-time strategy, except instead of having control over your units, they all have minds of their own and are influenced differently by gold, glory, or a lust for adventure. The basic premise of the original, which is continued in the sequel, is that you are the ruler of the realm, in charge of managing, building, and populating your kingdom. The story is presented in a series of quests, each with its own objective. Maybe you have to find the cure to a terrible plague, or gather enough gold to repay some conniving demon. The thing is, you and the guilds of heroes you employ are not alone. The game features a variety of nasty enemies and surprises that can make the simplest of tasks suddenly far more challenging. Anyone I know and plenty of random strangers could probably tell you that I'll talk the pants off any unfortunate soul I managed to corner about how much I loved the original Majesty game. It was a huge part of my childhood and one of the reasons I'm still such an avid gamer today. As such, you can imagine my excitement when I found out they'd made a shiny new sequel. The most obvious way that Majesty 2 improves upon the base game is by expanding it. More buildings, more upgrades, and therefore more strategy to think about. Buildings like the Rangers Guild, which originally had little function other than recruiting and housing your rangers, now come with abilities and upgrades for your heroes. This means a lot more choices for the player, who now has to decide between upgrading their rangers, giving their warriors better armor, or buying the heal spell from the Clerics Guild. And this leads me to the next improvement, the implementation of the new class system. Most importantly, the inclusion of the Clerics Guild. In the original game, unless you chose to go with the temple to Agrella, the goddess of life, it was impossible to get healers, and consequently this meant that you couldn't get opposing and much more interesting temples, Fervus and Crypta, the gods of nature and death. In Majesty 2, clerics can be upgraded to priestesses of life or death depending on which temple you build later on, so you can have healers and still amass an army of skeletons and wild beasts later in the game. In fact, it's possible to build any combination of temples or races now, although the heroes from opposing factions are liable to disagree with one another. In order to balance this change, an Age of Mythology styled system has been used regarding where you're actually allowed to build temples, which can only be placed on special holy grounds, often guarded by feisty elementals. Once again, this just allows for more strategic play by limiting the amount of temples you can build, but allowing you to build whichever combination your situation requires. One thing's for sure, Majesty 2 is, in my opinion, a fun and challenging game, and in a lot of ways it's definitely improved on the original. Most reasons I have for scrutinizing it arise from my overwhelming nostalgia and love of the first game. While trying my hardest not to simply say, it's different and therefore I'm unhappy, I couldn't help but be disappointed over minor and objectively inconsequential details, like how they changed the voices of the units in the soundtrack. Does it impact the overall gameplay? No, not really. Is it still going to annoy me that the Rangers sound less like Aragorn and more like Robin Hood? Yes, but if that's all they have to complain about, then I'm going to be pretty impressed. Heroes seem a lot less willing to respond to reward or attack flags in Majesty 2. At least the higher their level, the more likely they were to simply ignore your wishes unless you flash some serious coin. Perhaps it's just me, and I have yet to adjust, but after realizing that the game seemed a lot harder now, I then realized that this is supposed to be balanced by the new spells of the crown. These 4 omnipotent incantations that you pick up as you progress through the campaign, that can be used at any time for no cost, but consequentially go on cooldown to avoid being ridiculously overpowered. Now, I won't say that the spells were poorly balanced or that choosing which spell to use and when didn't add to the strategy of the game, but I personally felt that if the heroes had been a little bit more willing to work, I wouldn't have needed them at all. They weren't bad, but they weren't really outstanding either. They were just there. Mostly I just used the one that gave me lots of money every time they came off cooldown, and then used the money to coax my heroes into fighting off the party of Minotaur, bashing all my guard towers to pieces. I will admit that the reluctance of heroes to respond to your call is counterbalanced later on if you get the right heroes. Priestesses of Crypta are not only willing to bash apart whatever heads you point out for a more than reasonable price, but they also take an entourage of skeletons, vampires, and other nasties along with them wherever they go. I was also pleased to have the shiny new "Don't go there" flag, so I could stop hero after hero from running headfirst into pockets of high-level enemies and costing me a fortune in resurrection costs. This was another helpful change that actually felt like it increased the control the player has over what's going on. Last of all, I always wish there was some mode or expansion where I could get to play as the various beasts and fantastic monsters of Majesty, and I was subsequently delighted to find that they added a whole new campaign for that, and it's not half bad either. The story for this campaign is, in my opinion, even better than the one for the base game, and it holds together really well in terms of gameplay. So in conclusion, Majesty 2 isn't perfect, but very few games are. It's fun and challenging, and despite the changes made to characters and voices, it's still true enough to the original game that I would recommend it to any die-hard fans I could find. Overall, Majesty 2 is a charming sequel to one of my favourite titles and an excellent game.